"This sandwich is good enough for you," the flight attendant smirked, handing the plain meal to the woman in seat 3C while giving fancy food to the men. She had no idea this passenger was a powerful CEO. Just hours later after landing, that CEO made one phone call. "Fire all of them. Right now." Suddenly, the entire crew learned what happens when you look down on a woman in a Navy suit. And Cohen smoothed her Navy jacket as her private car pulled up to Dallas International Airport. At 45, she knew how to blend in despite being CEO of Cohen Technologies, one of America's fastest-growing companies. Today's flight to Atlanta came before the biggest news of her career, buying their main rival for $2.8 billion, a deal that would shake up the entire industry. "Your papers, Miss Cohen," her assistant said, giving her a thin folder. "Remember, the board meets you at Atlanta Airport at 3 p.m. Anne nodded, putting the folder in her leather bag. "Thanks, Elizabeth. See you tomorrow." As the driver unloaded her suitcase and checked her phone one last time, a message from George Ortiz, CEO of Summit Airlines, confirmed their dinner next week. His company had been flying her executives around for years, making her account worth millions yearly. The business relationship mattered to both of them, though they'd never met face to face. Inside the terminal, Anne skipped the main security line, heading to the VIP access gate. The worker barely glanced at her boarding pass before waving her through. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," he said mechanically, already looking past her to the next person. And was used to this, the polite indifference. Early in her career, it bothered her how men in suits got instant respect, while she had to prove herself over and over. These days she almost liked being invisible. It let her see how people really acted when they didn't think anyone important was watching. The VIP lounge was packed with business travelers. Men in expensive suits owned the space, their loud voices filling the room as they talked about markets and golf scores. A few women in business clothes sat among them, some trying to match the men's loudness, others quietly working on laptops. Anne chose a quiet corner, ordering sparkling water before reviewing her notes. The buyout papers needed one last look before tomorrow's announcement. She was so deep in her work that she almost missed the boarding call. As she approached the gate, Anne noticed the crew greeting passengers. The lead flight attendant, a brunette with a perfect smile, was chatting warmly with an older businessman in a Navy suit. "Mr. Johnson, so wonderful to see you again. We've saved your favorite scotch," the attendant gushed. When it was Anne's turn, the same attendant, Nicole according to her name tag, gave her a quick nod. "Boarding pass?" Nicole asked, her warm smile replaced with cold efficiency, and showed her first-class ticket. Nicole scanned it, then returned it without meeting Anne's eyes. "Seat 3C, she said, already looking past and to the next passenger. "Down the aisle to your right." On the plane, Anne stored her bag and settled into her window seat. First class was filling up with the usual crowd, mostly men in their 50s and 60s, with a few younger executives mixed in. She watched as each male passenger got personal greetings from the crew. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. Welcome back. Would you like some champagne? Mr. Pierce, we haven't seen you in a few weeks. How was Chicago?" And watched it all with quiet interest. No one had offered her a pre-flight drink, even though her Summit Airlines profile showed she was a Diamond Elite member who had flown over 100,000 miles just this year. As the final passengers boarded, a tall man in a gray suit approached her row. "3D," he said with a practiced smile, pointing to the aisle seat beside her. "Looks like we're neighbors today." Gerald Hill, according to the fancy initials on his sleeve buttons, settled in beside her, immediately waving to a passing flight attendant. "Nicole, good to see you again," he called as if they were old friends, and returned to her papers, mentally preparing for what experience told her would be an eye-opening flight, though not in the way the crew might expect. The safety demonstration finished as the plane backed away from the gate, and had already put away her papers, now watching the subtle power games in the cabin with trained eyes. Nicole and another flight attendant moved through first class, offering hot towels to the passengers. "Here you are, Mr. Hill," Nicole said, presenting the steaming towel with a flourish. Careful, it's hot. When she reached Anne, she simply dropped the towel on her tray table without a word, already turning toward the next row, and wiped her hands slowly, watching as Nicole chatted happily with the businessman across the aisle. It wasn't that Anne expected special treatment. It was the stark difference in basic politeness that caught her attention. As the plane reached cruising height, the meal service began. Nicole approached the first row with a tablet in hand. "Good morning, gentlemen. For today's lunch we have a seared salmon with quinoa, a premium Angus beef burger, or a gourmet chicken wrap. And what can I get you to drink?" And listened as the flight attendant worked her way through the cabin, keeping her warm, attentive approach with each male passenger. The man beside her, Gerald, ordered the beef burger with a scotch on the rocks, receiving an "Excellent choice, Mr. Hill," in response. When Nicole finally reached Anne, her manner changed subtly. No smile, no eye contact, just cold efficiency. "What would you like?" she asked, her tone flat. "Could you tell me about the lunch options, please?" Anne asked politely. Nicole's lips tightened slightly. "We have a sandwich or a wrap left." Anne raised an eyebrow. "I thought there was salmon and beef as well." "Those are limited," Nicole replied curtly. "We've run out." From the corner of her eye, Anne noticed the flight attendant serving the salmon dish to a male passenger who had boarded after her. She made a mental note but didn't comment. "The wrap then, and sparkling water, please." "We'll serve shortly," Nicole said, moving away without acknowledgement. Gerald leaned over slightly. "First time in first class?" he asked, his tone friendly but slightly condescending. "Not exactly," Anne replied with a small smile. "I fly frequently." "Well, tip for next time, book the kosher meal in advance. It's always better than the regular options, and they can't run out because it's reserved." And nodded politely. "Thank you for the advice." As drinks were served, and noted that Gerald received his scotch in a crystal glass with premium brand visible on the bottle, while her sparkling water came in a plastic cup without a lemon slice. The man to her right, an older executive who had boarded last, received not only his requested bourbon, but also warm nuts and a personal check-in from the head flight attendant. When the meals arrived, the difference became even more obvious. Gerald's tray featured the beef burger on proper china, garnished with fancy greens and served with truffle fries. A cloth napkin and metal cutlery completed the setup. Nicole placed Anne's tray before her with barely a glance. Instead of the wrap she had ordered, there was a plain turkey sandwich on a paper plate with a packet of chips. Plastic cutlery was wrapped in a thin napkin. "This isn't what I ordered," Anne noted calmly. Nicole gave her a brief, tight smile. "We ran out of wraps too. This tray suits you just fine." She moved on before Anne could respond. From the seat behind her, and overheard a male passenger being offered both the wrap and salmon options. The very items supposedly out of stock. Anne took out her phone, opened her notes app, and began typing quietly. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such treatment while traveling, but it was certainly the most obvious. And on this particular day with this particular airline, the timing couldn't have been worse for them. And unwrapped the sandwich slowly, keeping her cool despite the clear insult. The bread was slightly stale, the filling thin, nothing like the gourmet meals being served around her. As she took a small bite, she watched Nicole attending to Gerald with extra attention. "How's the burger, Mr. Hill? Can I get you another scotch?" "Excellent as always, Nicole," he replied. "And yes, another would be perfect." Nicole beamed at him before turning away, never acknowledging Anne beside him. It was as if there were an invisible wall between seats 3C and 3D. And sipped her water, continuing her careful note-taking on her phone. 20 minutes into the meal service, she noticed the flight attendants gathered near the kitchen, Nicole's voice carrying just enough for her to catch bits. "Always complaining. Shouldn't be up here anyway." A quick glance showed Nicole pointing in her direction while whispering to another crew member. The other attendant peeked over, then quickly looked away when she noticed and watching. Gerald had started talking with a businessman across the aisle, their voices carrying confidently as they discussed their latest golf games and business deals. And remained quiet, listening as they exchanged cards and made plans to meet at a country club the following week. "Excuse me," Anne finally said, pressing her call button. The light stayed on for nearly 5 minutes before Nicole approached, her expression making clear the interruption was unwelcome. "Yes." Her tone was clipped, professional but cold. "I didn't receive any dessert," Anne noted calmly, having seen chocolate mousse being served to other passengers in first class. Nicole's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We've run out. Anything else?" Before Anne could respond, Nicole was already turning away. As she did, her elbow deliberately knocked against Anne's water cup, spilling it across the tray. "Oh!" Nicole's surprise seemed fake. "I'm so sorry about that." She grabbed a thin napkin and dropped it on the puddle, making minimal effort to clean up the spill that was now dripping onto Anne's navy pants. "Let me know if you need anything else," Nicole added before walking away, leaving Anne to deal with the mess. Gerald glanced over, offering a quick "tough luck," before returning to his conversation across the aisle. Anne dabbed at her wet pants, adding another note to her phone. She had faced her share of subtle discrimination throughout her career, but rarely so openly. As a woman who had risen from entry-level programmer to CEO, she'd grown thick skin and a strategic mind. When the head flight attendant passed by a few minutes later, and stopped him with a polite gesture. "Excuse me, could I please have your name?" The man looked surprised but answered professionally. "Samuel Johnson, ma'am. Is there a problem I can help with?" "Not at the moment, Mr. Johnson. I'd just like to know for my records." His expression changed to confusion, but he nodded and continued down the aisle. From her seat, Anne could see Nicole serving fresh coffee to the businessmen, offering them chocolate cookies that had mysteriously appeared despite the supposed dessert shortage. When Gerald received his coffee in a porcelain cup with a cookie on a small plate, Nicole deliberately avoided looking in Anne's direction. The message was clear. Some passengers deserve premium service, and in Nicole's mind, Anne was not one of them. Anne closed her notes app and opened her email instead. She wrote a message to her assistant. "Elizabeth, please get the contact information for George Ortiz's office. I'll need to speak with him directly after landing. Priority level. Immediate." With that sent, she settled back in her seat, outwardly calm, while her mind worked through the exact steps she would take once they reached Atlanta. The rest of the flight continued in much the same pattern. When the drink service came around again, Nicole managed to skip Anne's row entirely, though she cheerfully offered Gerald another scotch. When Anne used her call button again, a different flight attendant responded, though her manner suggested Nicole had already talked to her about the difficult passenger in 3C. And asked for a coffee, receiving it after a long delay in a paper cup, lukewarm and black, without the milk she had requested. Rather than pointing out the mistake, she simply added it to her growing list. An hour before landing, the head flight attendant made his way through the cabin, giving out hot towels to refresh the passengers. When he reached Anne, he hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where Nicole was watching. "Would you like a hot towel, ma'am?" he asked, his tone neutral, but his expression uncertain. "Yes, thank you," Anne replied with a small smile. After he moved on, she noticed Nicole approach him in the kitchen, whispering something that made him look back at and with new wariness. Gerald had fallen asleep beside her, his half-finished scotch still loosely held in his hand. Across the aisle, two other businessmen were discussing a recent merger, their voices carrying easily. "Did you hear about Cohen Technologies?" one asked. "Word is they're announcing a major acquisition tomorrow. And Cohen's company. She's been making waves lately. Not what anyone expected from her when she took over. She's ruthless from what I hear. Brilliant but doesn't put up with fools." And kept her face neutral, though a hint of a smile played at the corner of her mouth. Her reputation was well known in business circles, though few would recognize her face. She had deliberately kept a low profile throughout her career, rarely appearing in press photos and turning down most speaking events. This invisibility had served her well, allowing her to observe people's true behavior rather than the fake respect often shown to known executives. As the aircraft began dropping toward Atlanta, the cabin crew prepared for landing. Anne closed her laptop and put away her belongings, catching Nicole's eye briefly as the flight attendant passed by. Nicole quickly looked away, her discomfort obvious now that she had heard the businessman's conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our descent into Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, please make sure your seatbelts are fastened, your tray tables are up, and your seats are in the upright position. The captain's announcement continued as the plane dropped through the clouds, showing the sprawling city below. Anne gazed out the window, mentally reviewing the steps she would take once they landed. The buyout announcement was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but she had another matter to handle first. As the wheels touched down on the runway, a flight attendant thanked the passengers for flying Summit Airlines. The usual rush for overhead bins began as soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, despite the crew's request for passengers to stay seated. Gerald woke with a start, checking his watch before gathering his things. He nodded curtly to Anne as he stood, not bothering with a goodbye as he joined the line forming in the aisle. Nicole moved through the cabin, thanking each male passenger personally for choosing Summit and saying she hoped to see them again soon. When she passed Anne's row, she offered only a quick nod before moving on. Anne stayed seated, allowing the initial rush to die down. She had no need to hurry. Her driver would be waiting regardless, and she had a phone call to make before leaving the airport. She watched as Nicole laughed at something Gerald said near the exit. The flight attendant's entire manner transformed into warm professionalism, a courtesy selectively applied. When the cabin had mostly emptied, and finally stood, collecting her bag with unhurried precision, the real business of the day was about to begin. The walkway hummed with activity as passengers streamed toward the terminal, and walked at a steady pace, watching Nicole and the other crew members stationed at the aircraft door, offering warm goodbyes to select passengers. As Anne approached, Nicole's smile dimmed, replaced by a neutral expression that barely acknowledged her presence. "Thank you for flying with us," Nicole said mechanically, already looking past and to the passenger behind her, and paused briefly. "I'll be sure to document my experience thoroughly," she said, her tone pleasant but her eyes sharp. A flash of uncertainty crossed Nicole's face before she masked it with professional indifference. "Have a nice day, ma'am." Inside the terminal, and bypassed the crowds heading toward baggage claim and made her way to the exclusive Summit Diamond Lounge. The attendant at the entrance scanned her boarding pass, her eyes widening slightly as the system flagged Anne's status. "Miss Cohen," she said, her tone suddenly respectful. "We weren't told you were traveling today. Please come in. Would you like me to arrange a private room?" "That would be perfect. Thank you," Anne replied, noting the immediate change in treatment now that her elite status had been properly recognized. Inside the private room, Anne set her bag down and took out her phone. She dialed a number from memory, waiting only moments before it was answered. "Elizabeth, I've landed. Has Mr. Ortiz's office responded?" "Yes, Miss Cohen. He was quite surprised by your request for an immediate meeting. He's actually at Atlanta Airport for a board presentation and can meet you in 30 minutes. "Perfect. Have him come to the Diamond Lounge, private room 3. "And Elizabeth?" "Yes. Make sure he brings the crew list and passenger service records from Summit Flight 1382 from Dallas today." "Already requested, Miss Cohen." And ended the call and settled into the plush chair, reviewing her detailed notes from the flight. Each instance of unfair treatment was documented with precision: times, statements, and specific actions. 20 minutes later, a light knock at the door preceded the lounge attendant. "Miss Cohen, Mr. Ortiz has arrived." George Ortiz entered the room with the confident stride of someone used to commanding attention. In his mid-60s with silver hair and a perfect suit, he extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Miss Cohen, a pleasure to finally meet in person. I must say, your request for an immediate meeting was quite unexpected." And shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for accommodating me, Mr. Ortiz. Please sit down." as George settled into the chair across from her. His expression was one of polite curiosity mixed with slight confusion. "I understand you were on our Dallas-Atlanta flight today. I hope everything was satisfactory." "Far from it," Anne replied calmly, sliding her phone across the table. "I've documented a pattern of discriminatory behavior from one of your flight attendants, supported by the head attendant. I'd like you to review it." George's brow furrowed as he picked up the phone, scrolling through her detailed notes. His expression shifted from confusion to concern, then to alarm. "This is troubling," he said finally, looking up. "I assure you, Miss Cohen, this is not how Summit service is supposed to be." "I would hope not," Anne replied. "Especially considering that Cohen Technologies has been your company's second-largest corporate client for the past 3 years. Our contract, worth about $22 million yearly, is up for renewal next month." George's face paled visibly. "I had no idea. Few people connect my name with my face," Anne said. "I prefer it that way. It allows me to see how your staff truly treats passengers when they believe no one important is watching." She held his gaze steadily. "Now, Mr. Ortiz, I'd like to discuss how you plan to fix this situation, because I can assure you it will be fixed one way or another." The private lounge had grown uncomfortably silent as George Ortiz placed Anne's phone back on the table, his fingers slightly shaky. The reality of the situation had clearly hit him. One of his most valuable corporate clients had been deliberately mistreated by his staff, and the consequences could be severe. "Ms. Cohen," he began, his tone now deeply apologetic, "I want to personally express how sorry I am for your experience today. This is absolutely unacceptable." "I agree," Anne said simply. "What I'm interested in is action, not apologies." George nodded, straightening his posture. "Of course. I've already sent a message to have the crew held at the airport. I'll be conducting an immediate investigation." "That's a start," Anne replied. She opened her laptop and turned it toward him. "You should also know that Cohen Technologies isn't the only significant corporate account affected by this behavior. My assistant has gathered evidence suggesting a pattern of similar complaints from female executives at other companies who have contracts with Summit." George's eyes widened as he scanned the documentation. "I had no idea this was happening across the board." "Most discrimination is," Anne observed, "until someone decides to stop it." A knock at the door interrupted them as George's assistant entered with a folder. "The crew list and service records you requested, sir." George thanked him, then spread the documents on the table. "Nicole Underwood has been with us for 8 years. There have been notes in her file, but nothing that triggered formal action. Because the complaints were likely dismissed as isolated incidents," Anne said. "That ends today." 40 minutes later, Nicole Underwood and head flight attendant Samuel Johnson stood in the administration office at Atlanta Airport facing George Ortiz and Anne Cohen. Nicole's confident manner had vanished, replaced by visible shock when she recognized her former passenger now sitting beside the CEO. "Miss Underwood," George began gravely, "I've reviewed significant evidence of discriminatory behavior on today's flight, backed up by multiple passenger accounts and your own service record." Nicole's face flushed. "Sir, I can explain." "There's no explanation that would justify what I witnessed," and interjected calmly. "Or what appears to be a pattern of similar behavior over time." George nodded. "Effective immediately. Both of you are suspended pending investigation. Given the evidence already available, I expect this will result in termination." Samuel began to protest, but George raised his hand. "The decision is final. Summit Airlines cannot and will not tolerate discrimination of any kind." As Nicole and Samuel were escorted out, George turned to Anne. "I'll be implementing a complete review of our training methods and service standards." Anne nodded. "I'll be watching the results closely, Mr. Ortiz. Respect shouldn't depend on whether you recognize the person you're serving. In business and in life, true character shows in how we treat others when we think no one important is watching. Have you ever been underestimated like Anne Cohen? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, everyone deserves respect regardless of appearance or gender. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one being underestimated. If Anne's story touched you, hit that subscribe button and join our Genie Soul Stories family. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. New stories every week that touch your heart and soul.